For thousands of years, these stories have echoed across civilizations, shaping empires, inspiring revolutions, and haunting the dreams of kings and commoners alike. They are tales of impossible odds, of divine fury and divine mercy, of heroes who stood alone against the darkness and changed the course of history. Tonight, you will witness a shepherd boy face a giant that an entire army feared. You will see the mightiest sea on earth torn apart by the hand of God. You will watch a strong man brought to ruin by a woman's whisper, and a prophet who mocked 450 priests before calling fire from the sky. And in the final hour, you will descend into a pit of starving lions with a man whose only weapon was prayer. These are the 5 most dramatic, most cinematic, most unforgettable stories from the Bible, and they all begin now. Egypt, the greatest empire the ancient world had ever known. Its pyramids scraped the heavens, its armies were unstoppable, its pharaoh was worshipped as a living god, and beneath all that glory, an entire nation of people lived in chains. The Israelites had been slaves in Egypt for 400 years, generation after generation born into bondage, their backs bent under the weight of bricks and mortar, building monuments to a king who saw them as less than human. They cried out to their God, and for centuries it seemed like no one was listening. But then, in the reeds along the banks of the Nile, a baby was placed in a basket. His mother, desperate to save him from a royal decree that ordered the death of every Hebrew male infant, set him adrift on the river, trusting that somehow, against all odds, her son would survive. He did more than survive. He was found by the daughter of Pharaoh himself and raised as Egyptian royalty. His name was Moses. For 40 years, Moses lived as a prince of Egypt, surrounded by luxury, educated in the finest schools, trained in the art of war. But the blood of his people ran through his veins, and when he witnessed an Egyptian overseer beating a Hebrew slave to death, something inside him snapped. He killed the overseer, and when the murder was discovered, he fled into the desert, leaving behind everything he had ever known. For another 40 years, Moses lived as a shepherd in the wilderness of Midian, a forgotten man. An exile, the prince of Egypt reduced to herding sheep across an empty wasteland. And then, on an ordinary day, on an ordinary mountain, God spoke. A bush erupted in flames but did not burn. From within the fire came a voice that shook the ground beneath Moses' feet, the voice of the Almighty, telling this 80-year-old shepherd that he had been chosen to do the impossible. Go back to Egypt, stand before the most powerful man on earth, and demand the release of an entire nation of slaves. Moses returned to Egypt, and he stood before Pharaoh with nothing but a wooden staff and 3 words: "Let my people go." Pharaoh laughed. Who was this old shepherd to make demands of a god king? And so began the plagues. The first was a warning. Moses stretched his staff over the Nile, and the entire river turned to blood. The water that sustained all of Egypt became undrinkable, stinking of death. Fish floated belly up on the crimson surface. Pharaoh refused to relent. Then came the frogs, millions of them swarming out of the river, flooding into homes, into beds, into ovens. They were everywhere, an inescapable invasion of slippery, croaking chaos. Still, Pharaoh refused. Gnats descended like a living fog. Flies blackened the sky. A disease swept through the livestock, killing cattle, horses, and donkeys in the fields. Boils erupted on the skin of every Egyptian. Painful, festering sores that made grown men weep. And still, Pharaoh's heart was hard. Then the sky itself turned against Egypt. Hailstones the size of fists rained down, shattering trees and crushing crops. What the hail did not destroy, the locusts devoured. They came in a cloud so thick it blotted out the sun, stripping the land bare of every green thing. And then came the darkness, not the ordinary darkness of night, but a suffocating, tangible blackness that lasted 3 days. The Egyptians could not see their own hands in front of their faces. It was as if the sun itself had been extinguished. 9 plagues, 9 chances, and 9 times Pharaoh said no. The 10th plague was different. At August, God warned Moses that at midnight, the firstborn son of every Egyptian household would die. Every family, from the Pharaoh's palace to the poorest peasant's hut, would lose their eldest child. But the Israelites were given a way to protect themselves. They were to sacrifice a lamb and paint its blood on the doorframes of their homes. When the angel of death passed through Egypt, it would pass over any house marked with blood. That night, the screams began at midnight. A sound of grief so vast, so all-encompassing, that it echoed through every street, every alley, every palace corridor in Egypt. There was not a single Egyptian home where someone had not died. Pharaoh, clutching the body of his own dead son, finally broke. He summoned Moses in the middle of the night. "Go," he said. "Take your people and go." 600,000 men, plus women and children, walked out of Egypt that night. After 400 years of slavery, they were free. But freedom was not yet won. Pharaoh's grief turned to rage. How dare these slaves walk away from the empire that owned them? He assembled 600 of his finest chariots, the iron fist of the Egyptian military, and sent them thundering after the Israelites. The Israelites reached the shore of the Red Sea and looked back to see a dust cloud on the horizon. The sound of chariot wheels, the glint of bronze spearheads in the sun. They were trapped. An ocean in front of them, the most powerful army on earth behind them. The people panicked. They screamed at Moses, "Were there no graves in Egypt that you brought us here to die?" Moses raised his staff over the water, and the sea obeyed. A wall of wind roared across the surface, and the waters began to separate. Slowly at first, then with terrifying speed, the Red Sea split in two. Towering walls of water rose on either side, held back by an invisible force, and between them, a path of dry ground appeared. The Israelites walked through on dry land, hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children, walking between walls of water that rose higher than any building they had ever seen. Fish swam behind the transparent walls, the deep groaned and churned, and above them, a pillar of fire lit the way forward. When the last Israelite reached the far shore, the Egyptian chariots charged into the gap, wheels churned through the wet sand. Horses screamed as the ground softened beneath them. The chariot wheels locked and broke. And then Moses stretched out his hand one final time. The walls collapsed. A mountain of water crashed down on the Egyptian army. Horses, chariots, and soldiers were swallowed in an instant. The mightiest military force on earth, destroyed in seconds. On the far shore, the Israelites stood in silence, watching the waves settle. And then, slowly, a song began to rise, a song of deliverance that would be sung for 3,000 years. The slaves were free, and the empire that had held them was broken. The Valley of Elah, a narrow strip of land between two ridgelines in the hill country of ancient Israel. On one ridge, the army of Israel. On the other, the army of the Philistines. Between them, a killing ground where the fate of a nation would be decided. For 40 days, neither side had moved, and the reason stood 9 feet tall in the valley below. His name was Goliath, a champion of Gath, a warrior bred for battle from birth. He wore a bronze helmet that gleamed like a second sun. His coat of armor weighed 125 pounds, a wall of interlocking bronze scales that covered him from neck to knee. His legs were sheathed in bronze greaves. A massive javelin hung across his back, and in his hand he carried a spear with an iron point that weighed 15 pounds alone. Every morning and every evening for 40 days, Goliath walked into the valley and issued the same challenge. "Send me your best man. Let him fight me. If he wins, we will be your slaves. But if I win, you become ours." No one answered. Not one soldier in the entire Israelite army dared to step forward, not even King Saul, who stood a head taller than any other man in Israel. They had looked at Goliath and done the math. They had measured his size, his armor, his weapons, and they had concluded that fighting him was suicide. And every day that passed without an answer, the humiliation deepened. Tyranny. Every day the giants' mocking laughter echoed off the valley walls, and the soldiers of Israel shrank a little further into their tents. Into this stalemate walked a teenage boy carrying bread and cheese. David was the youngest son of Jesse, a man from Bethlehem. He was not a soldier. He was a shepherd, tasked with watching his father's sheep in the hills. His father had sent him to the front lines with provisions for his 3 older brothers who were serving in Saul's army. David arrived at the camp just as Goliath made his morning challenge. He watched the giant stride into the valley, his armor catching the light, his voice booming off the rocks, and he watched every soldier around him flinch and turn away. David did not flinch. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine, he asked, that he should defy the armies of the living God? His oldest brother Eliab heard him and was furious. "Who do you think you are? Go home and tend your sheep, you arrogant little brat." But David's words reached King Saul, and Saul, desperate after 40 days of paralysis, agreed to see the boy. David stood before the king and made his case. He told Saul about the lion that had attacked his father's flock, how he had chased it down, seized it by the mane, and killed it with his bare hands. He told him about the bear. "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear," David said, "will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul had no one else. He agreed. First, Saul tried to outfit David with his own armor, a royal coat of mail, a bronze helmet, a sword. David put them on, took a few steps, and shook his head. "I cannot fight in these," he said. "I am not used to them." He took them off. Instead, David picked up his shepherd's staff and walked to a nearby stream. He knelt down and carefully selected 5 smooth stones from the riverbed. He placed them in his leather pouch, gripped his sling, and walked into the valley. A shepherd boy with a sling, walking toward a 9-foot giant in full battle armor. Goliath could not believe what he was seeing. He squinted at the figure approaching him. When he realized it was a boy, barely old enough to grow a beard, red-cheeked and carrying a stick, he was insulted to the core of his being. "Am I a dog," he roared, "that you come at me with sticks? Come here, boy, and I will feed your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." David did not slow down. He called back across the valley floor, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin. But I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel." Goliath charged. The ground shook with every step. His shield-bearer ran ahead of him. The giant raised his spear, a weapon designed to punch through armor and bone. David ran too, not away, toward the giant. As he ran, his hand dipped into the pouch. His fingers closed around a single smooth stone. He loaded it into his sling. The sling was an ancient weapon, deceptively simple. A leather pouch attached to 2 cords. In the hands of a skilled user, it could accelerate a stone to the speed of a modern bullet. And David had been practicing since he was old enough to hold one. He swung it once, twice. The stone accelerated in a blur. And he released. The stone struck Goliath in the center of his forehead, the one place his armor did not protect. The impact shattered bone. The giant's eyes went blank. His massive body swayed for a moment, as if the earth itself could not believe what had just happened. And then he fell. 9 feet of bronze and iron and flesh crashed face first into the dirt. The sound of the impact echoed across the valley like a thunderclap. Silence. Absolute silence. 2 armies, frozen in disbelief. David walked to the fallen giant. He did not have a sword of his own, so he drew Goliath's sword from its sheath, raised it above his head, and struck. He held up the giant's head for both armies to see. The Philistine army broke. Panic rippled through their ranks like a wave. If their champion could fall to a boy with a rock, then the God of Israel was real, and they were already dead. They turned and ran. The Israelite army surged forward with a roar that shook the hills. They chased the Philistines all the way back to the gates of Gath and Ekron, cutting them down as they fled. And David, the shepherd boy from Bethlehem, the youngest son of a nobody, walked off that battlefield as a legend. He would go on to become the greatest king Israel ever knew. But it all started here, in a valley, with 5 smooth stones and an unshakable faith that size does not determine destiny. Before David, before Saul, before Israel had any king at all, the nation was led by judges, warrior prophets raised up by God in times of crisis. And of all the judges, none was more powerful, more reckless, or more tragic than Samson. His story begins before he was born. An angel appeared to his mother and told her that her son would be set apart for God from the womb. He would be a Nazirite, bound by a sacred vow. He could never drink wine. He could never touch anything unclean, and his hair could never be cut. In return, the Spirit of the Lord would come upon him with power that no ordinary man could possess. Samson grew into a man unlike any other. He was not merely strong. He was impossibly, supernaturally, terrifyingly strong. When a young lion attacked him on a road, Samson tore it apart with his bare hands, as easily as one might tear a young goat. He did not even mention it to his parents. When the Philistines, the occupying power that ruled over Israel, burned his wife alive as punishment for a riddle gone wrong, Samson's rage was volcanic. He caught 300 foxes, tied their tails together in pairs with torches between them, and released them into the Philistine grain fields. The entire harvest went up in flames. When the Philistines came for revenge, Samson picked up the jawbone of a donkey and killed 1,000 men. 1,000 armed soldiers, cut down by one man with a piece of bone. When they tried to trap him inside the city of Gaza, locking the massive gates behind him, Samson simply ripped the gates off their hinges, posts and all, hoisted them onto his shoulders, and carried them to the top of a hill 40 miles away. The Philistines were terrified of him. He was a one-man army, an unstoppable force of nature. For 20 years he judged Israel, and for 20 years the Philistines could not touch him. But Samson had a weakness, and it was not his hair, it was his heart. Samson was drawn to dangerous women. He desired what he should not have desired. He crossed boundaries he should not have crossed. And it was this pattern that would destroy him. Her name was Delilah. She lived in the valley of Sorek, in the borderlands between Israel and Philistia. The Bible does not say she was beautiful, but it does not need to. Samson fell for her completely, recklessly, blindly. The Philistine lords saw their opportunity. 5 rulers, each offering Delilah 1,100 pieces of silver, a staggering fortune, if she could discover the secret of Samson's strength and deliver him into their hands. 5,500 pieces of silver, enough to live like a queen for the rest of her life. Delilah agreed. And so began one of the most psychologically devastating seductions in all of literature. The first night, she pressed herself close to Samson and whispered in his ear. "Tell me," she said, "the secret of your great strength. How could you be tied up and subdued?" Samson, still playing games, lied to her. "If they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried," he said, "I will become as weak as any other man," Delilah told the Philistines. They brought the bowstrings. She tied him up while he slept. Then she cried out, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He snapped the bowstrings like threads touched by fire. The hidden soldiers fled. The second time Delilah pouted. "You have mocked me. You told me lies. Now tell me how you can be tied up." Samson lied again. "New ropes that have never been used," he said. She tried it. He broke them like string. The third time, her voice hardened. She accused him of not truly loving her. Samson, still playing the game but getting closer to the edge, told her to weave his hair into a loom. She did. He pulled free, taking the loom with him. But Delilah was relentless. Day after day, night after night, she pressed him, she nagged him, she wept. She accused him of loving his secrets more than he loved her. The Bible says she pressed him daily with her words and urged him, so that his soul was vexed to death. And finally, Samson broke. He told her everything. "A razor has never come upon my head," he said, "for I have been a Nazirite, dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head is shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man." Delilah knew immediately that this time he had told her the truth. She sent word to the Philistine lords, "Come up once more, for he has told me all his heart." They came with the silver in their hands. That night, Delilah lulled Samson to sleep on her lap. The intimacy of it is devastating. He trusted her completely. Even after 3 attempts on his life, he laid his head in the lap of the woman who was about to destroy him. A man came in and shaved off the 7 braids of his hair. Delilah called out one last time, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He woke and thought, "I will go out as before and shake myself free." But the Bible records the most heartbreaking sentence in the entire story. He did not know that the Lord had left him. The Philistines seized him. They gouged out his eyes. They dragged the strongest man who ever lived to Gaza in bronze chains, blinded and broken. And they put him to work grinding grain in the prison, the work of a donkey. The mighty judge of Israel, stumbling in circles in the dark. But the Philistines made one critical mistake. They forgot about the hair. In prison, slowly, day by day, Samson's hair began to grow back. Weeks passed. Then months. The Philistines grew confident. They planned a great festival in the temple of their god Dagon to celebrate their victory over the man who had terrorized them for 20 years. 3,000 men and women packed the temple, filling the roof, the balconies, the courtyard. And for entertainment, they brought out Samson. They paraded the blind man before the crowd so they could mock him. The laughter of 3,000 people echoed off the stone pillars. Samson asked the boy who was guiding him to place his hands on the 2 central pillars that supported the temple. "Just let me lean against them," he said. The boy did. Samson gripped the pillars, one in each hand. He bowed his head and prayed one final prayer. "Sovereign Lord," he whispered, "remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more. Let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." Then he pushed. With everything he had, with every ounce of strength that had ever coursed through his body, with the last breath of a man who had wasted his gifts, squandered his calling, and lost everything, but in this final moment chose to use what he had been given one last time. The pillars cracked. The roof buckled. The walls leaned inward. And the temple of Dagon collapsed. 3,000 Philistines died in the rubble, more enemies killed in his death than in all the years of his life. They found Samson's body in the ruins, his hands still wrapped around the base of the pillars. His brothers came and carried him home, the strongest man who ever lived, destroyed not by any army, but by the whisper of a woman and the weakness of his own heart. Israel had fallen, not to an army, not to a plague, but to something far more insidious. King Ahab sat on the throne, and at his side was his wife Jezebel, a Phoenician princess who worshipped the storm god Baal. Jezebel was not content to worship her gods privately. She launched a systematic campaign to destroy the worship of the God of Israel and replace it with the cult of Baal. She built temples to Baal across the land. She installed 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah at the royal court. And she hunted down the prophets of the Lord and murdered them. The people of Israel, caught between fear and convenience, began to hedge their bets. They did not abandon God entirely. Instead, they tried to worship both, limping between two opinions, as if the God who thundered from Sinai could be reduced to one option among many. Into this spiritual catastrophe stepped a man named Elijah. We know almost nothing about his background. He appears in the biblical text like a thunderbolt, fully formed, already burning with conviction. He was from Tishbe in Gilead, a rough, wild country east of the Jordan. He wore a garment of animal hair and a leather belt. He looked like the wilderness itself had taken human form. Elijah's first act was to walk directly into Ahab's palace and deliver a declaration of war. "As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives," he said, "there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word." And then he vanished. The drought began immediately. The sky turned to bronze. The rivers dried up. The crops withered. For 3.5 years, not a single drop of rain fell on the land of Israel. The famine grew so severe that Ahab himself was personally scouring the countryside, looking for grass to keep the royal horses alive. After 3 years, God sent Elijah back. "Go, show yourself to Ahab," God said, "and I will send rain on the land." When Ahab saw Elijah approaching, his first words revealed everything about his character. "Is that you?" he said, "you troubler of Israel?" Elijah did not flinch. "I have not troubled Israel," he said. "But you have. You and your father's house. You abandoned the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals." And then Elijah issued the challenge that would become the most dramatic confrontation in the entire Old Testament. "Summon all of Israel to meet me at Mount Carmel," he said. "Bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." Ahab agreed. Perhaps he thought the sheer numbers would humiliate the lone prophet. Perhaps curiosity drove him. Whatever the reason, the stage was set. Mount Carmel rises above the Mediterranean coast, a rugged promontory jutting out into the sea. On the appointed day, the entire nation gathered on its slopes, hundreds of thousands of people, filling every vantage point, climbing trees, standing on rocks, pressed together in a massive crowd that stretched as far as the eye could see. Elijah stood alone on one side, 450 prophets of Baal on the other. One man against 450. Elijah stepped forward and addressed the crowd. "How long," he shouted, "will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." The people said nothing. Then Elijah laid out the terms. Both sides would build an altar. Both sides would prepare a sacrifice, a bull on wood. But neither side would light the fire. Instead, each side would call on their God, and the God who answered by fire, consuming the sacrifice from heaven, that God would be declared the true God. The crowd erupted. "Yes," they shouted, "this is a fair test." Elijah, with a hint of dark humor, gave Baal's prophets the first turn. After all, there were more of them. The prophets of Baal prepared their altar and their bull. They arranged the wood. And then they began to pray. "O Baal, answer us," they cried. From morning until noon they called out, dancing around the altar, working themselves into a frenzy. Nothing happened. At noon, Elijah began to mock them. "Shout louder," he called out. "Maybe your God is deep in thought. Maybe he is busy. Maybe he has gone on a journey. Or perhaps he is sleeping and needs to be awakened." Killed laughed. The crowd laughed. The prophets of Baal did not. Desperate, they escalated. They screamed louder. They slashed themselves with swords and spears until the blood ran down their bodies. They raved and prophesied all afternoon, working themselves into a hysteria that bordered on madness. But there was no voice, no answer, no fire. As the evening sacrifice approached, Elijah called the people close. "Come near to me," he said. They gathered around as Elijah rebuilt the altar of the Lord that had been torn down, a deliberate act of restoration. He took 12 stones, one for each tribe of Israel, and built the altar in the name of the Lord. He dug a trench around it deep enough to hold 2 measures of seed. He arranged the wood. He placed the bull on the wood. And then, he did something no one expected. "Fill 4 large jars with water," he said, "and pour it on the offering and on the wood." They did. "Do it again," he said. They did. "Do it a 3rd time." By the time they finished, the altar was drenched. Water ran off the sacrifice, soaked through the wood, and filled the trench to the brim. In the middle of a 3-year drought, Elijah had just made the impossible even more impossible. Then Elijah stepped forward. He did not scream. He did not dance. He did not cut himself. He simply prayed. "Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel," he said, "let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Answer me, Lord. Answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." The fire fell. It did not creep or crawl or flicker to life. It fell. Like a hammer from heaven, a column of fire that consumed the burnt offering, the wood, the stones, the soil, and the water in the trench. Everything. Incinerated in an instant. The heat blast knocked people backward. The roar was deafening. Where the altar had stood, there was nothing but scorched earth. Every person on that mountain fell face first to the ground. "The Lord, He is God," they cried. "The Lord, He is God." The contest was over. The 450 prophets of Baal were seized and executed at the brook Kishon. And then Elijah told Ahab something the king had not heard in 3.5 years. "Go, eat and drink. I hear the sound of heavy rain." Elijah climbed to the summit of Carmel and crouched on the ground with his face between his knees. He sent his servant to look toward the sea. Nothing. Again. Nothing. 6 times, nothing. The 7th time, a cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea. Elijah leapt to his feet. "Tell Ahab to hitch his chariot and ride before the rain stops him." The sky turned black. Wind screamed across the mountaintop. And the rain came. After 3.5 years, the heavens opened, and water poured down on the parched land of Israel like a dam had broken in the sky. And Elijah, the prophet who had stood alone against an empire, tucked his cloak into his belt and ran ahead of Ahab's chariot all the way to Jezreel. Outrunning the horses, outrunning the rain, a man on fire with the Spirit of God. The year was approximately 539 BC. Babylon, the empire that had conquered the known world, had itself been conquered overnight by the Persians. The great city fell without a fight, and a new king sat on the throne, Darius the Mede. When a new ruler takes power, the first order of business is always the same: decide who to keep and who to discard. Darius reorganized his vast empire into 120 provinces, each governed by a satrap, a regional administrator. Over these satraps, he placed 3 commissioners who answered directly to him. One of those 3 commissioners was a Hebrew exile named Daniel. Daniel was not young. He had been taken captive from Jerusalem as a teenager, decades earlier when Babylon first conquered Judah. He had survived the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. He had survived the madness of that king, who lost his mind and lived like an animal for 7 years. He had survived the fall of Babylon itself, interpreting the writing on the wall for Belshazzar on the very night the city fell. Daniel was now an old man, probably in his 80s. And he was the most competent administrator in the Persian Empire. Darius recognized this immediately. Daniel distinguished himself above all the other commissioners and satraps, the Bible says, because an excellent spirit was in him. The king planned to set him over the entire realm. This infuriated the other officials. They were Persian nobles, men of wealth and lineage and pride. The idea that a foreign captive, a Jew, an old man from a conquered nation, would be elevated above them was intolerable. So they did what jealous men in positions of power have always done. They looked for dirt. They investigated Daniel's administration, searching for corruption, negligence, any shred of misconduct they could use against him. They audited his accounts. They examined his decisions. They scrutinized his appointments. They found nothing. Not a single error. Not a trace of corruption. Daniel was, the Bible says, faithful, and no fault or negligence was found in him. The conspirators regrouped. If they could not find a flaw in his character, they would have to create one. And there was only one area where Daniel could be made vulnerable: his faith. 3 times a day, every day, without exception, Daniel knelt in his upper room, opened his windows toward Jerusalem, and prayed to his God. He had done this for his entire life. He had done it in Babylon, when it could have cost him everything. And he was doing it now in Persia. The conspirators devised a trap of elegant simplicity. They approached King Darius with flattery. "O king, live forever," they said. All the royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have agreed that the king should issue a decree. For the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, O king, shall be thrown into the den of lions. It was a stroke of political genius. Frame it as a loyalty test. Make it about honoring the king. And make the punishment so extreme that no sane person would risk it. Darius, flattered and perhaps not thinking clearly about the implications, signed the decree. Under the law of the Medes and Persians, once a royal decree was signed, it could not be revoked. Not even by the king himself. The trap was set. And when Daniel learned of the decree, he went home. He went upstairs. He opened his windows toward Jerusalem. And he prayed. He did not pray in secret. He did not close the curtains. He did not whisper. He knelt in full view of anyone passing by and prayed to his God, just as he had always done, 3 times a day. The conspirators were watching. They had positioned themselves where they could see his windows. And when they saw him kneeling, they had what they needed. They went straight to the king. "Did you not sign a decree," they asked, "that for 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or man except you, O king, shall be thrown into the lions' den?" Darius confirmed it. "The decree stands," he said, "in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed." Then they delivered the blow. "Daniel," they said, "one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day." The Bible says the king was deeply distressed. Darius realized instantly that he had been manipulated. He spent the rest of the day trying to find a legal loophole, some way to save Daniel without breaking the law. He worked until sunset, but the law was absolute. The conspirators returned at evening, pressing their case. "Remember, O king, the law of the Medes and Persians. No decree can be changed." Darius had no choice. With a heavy heart, he gave the order. Daniel was brought to the lions' den. The den was not a cage. It was a pit, carved out of rock, deep enough that no man could climb out. At the bottom, in the darkness, were the lions. These were not zoo animals. They were kept hungry, deliberately, brutally hungry. The den was an execution chamber, and the lions were the executioners. Before Daniel was lowered in, Darius spoke to him. His voice was strained with grief. "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you," he said. Daniel was lowered into the darkness. A stone was placed over the mouth of the den. The king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that no one could interfere. Then Darius went back to his palace. He could not eat. He refused entertainment. He could not sleep. The most powerful man in the world lay awake all night, tormented by what he had done. In the den, there was only darkness, the sound of breathing, deep and heavy, the scrape of claws on stone, the low, rumbling growl of animals that had not been fed. And in the middle of them, an old man on his knees, praying. At the first light of dawn, Darius leapt from his bed and ran to the den. He did not walk, he ran. The king of the Persian Empire, running through the corridors of his own palace like a desperate man. When he reached the den, he cried out in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" From the darkness below, a voice answered, "O king, live forever." Daniel was alive. "My God sent his angel," Daniel said, "and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight." And the Seth, "Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king." Darius was overjoyed. He ordered Daniel lifted out of the den immediately. When they brought him up into the light, there was not a scratch on him, not a single wound. He had spent the entire night surrounded by starving predators, and they had not touched him. Then the king's joy turned to justice. He ordered the men who had accused Daniel, along with their wives and children, to be thrown into the same den. They did not reach the bottom alive. The lions overpowered them and crushed their bones before they hit the floor. King Darius then issued a new decree, sent to every nation and language in his vast empire. "I issue a decree," he wrote, "that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. Daniel prospered. He outlasted another empire, an old man who had been thrown away by history, who had been a captive his entire adult life, who had no army, no wealth, no political leverage. All he had was his integrity and his God. And that was enough." 5 stories. 5 moments when ordinary people faced impossible circumstances and found something extraordinary within themselves. Moses, the exile who led a nation through the sea. David, the shepherd boy who toppled a giant. Samson, the strong man who discovered that his greatest enemy was himself. Elijah, the prophet who stood alone against an empire and called fire from heaven. And Daniel, the old man who walked into a pit of lions with nothing but his prayers. These stories have endured for 3,000 years because they are not really about miracles. They are about the human beings who stood at the edge of the impossible and refused to turn back. They are about courage in the face of overwhelming odds, faith when every rational calculation says to surrender, and the stubborn, defiant belief that there is something greater than the darkness pressing in. Whatever your sea, whatever your giant, whatever your lion's den, these ancient voices